Good afternoon, and thanks for joining our website. I'm Matt Stockton, agriculture economist and farm management specialist and for Nebraska Extension at University of Nebraska, Lincoln. Today is part of our Center of Agriculture Profitability webinar series, which usually happens on Thursdays, and it's at noon. So hopefully you guys are all enjoying your lunch. And we try to keep a full schedule on the website. You can check for those things at cap.unl.edu. Year in and year out, cow producers make decisions related to maintaining the cow herd. And of course, it's profitability. Good decisions today make a big difference in the future of that profitability and what happens and whether that ranch is profitable. So it's very important to make those choices. And one of these choices is the choice to retain or purchase replacement heifers, cows, whatever, so they keep the herd at a size that you can afford to farm or ranch. So what we've tried to do here at the university is to create a spreadsheet whereby we can talk about what is a respectable, or what we forecast would be a respectable value to pay for those replacements. This has been done by Randy Sainer, myself, and a couple of other people, and we call ourselves the Nebraska Beef Economics team, and we produce this annual forecast. And we're going to talk about that annual forecast today and a little bit about what it's about. And we're going to talk about what that break-even value might be depending on some circumstances and some different scenarios. So joining me today, of course, is one of the co-authors and educator here at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln and Lincoln County, Randy Sainer. Hello, Randy.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
Randy, would you like to start us out today?
I will. So you can see our first slide, and one thing I wanted to say is our contact information is on this slide, our emails and our phone numbers. And also, if you go down to the website here, and I'll try to bring my little pointer here, you can click onto that and that'll take you to the website where you can look at this article on Beef Watch. Also, you can take a picture of the little picture thing there, and it'll take you right to the website also. So let's get started. So when we're selecting a replacement heifer, it differs from ranch to ranch, but most cases, the value for retain and purchase replacement generally depend on several factors. Longevity of the replacement heifer, and that's just the heifer's ability to stay in the herd as long as she can, so she has a productive life. Productivity, that'd be the size and the quality of the calf she produces, will depend on what you get at the sell barn. It'll make difference in weight and difference in marketability of that calf. And then compatibility, both genetics and phenotype with herd mates. So when you're buying a heifer, let's say you're using Hereford Angus heifers, you might want to stay with that same heifer to keep the uniformity of those heifers rather than buy a different breed. So that compatibility is going to be important. So your calves are similar in size and weight. And it helps.
Well, this has a lot to do too, Randy, right? With managing. In other words, if you get cows that are big and cows that are small, and you're managing for smaller cattle, in other words, maybe you're not so much supplementation, the larger cows are going to suffer. So compatibility has a lot to do with how they conform to your management style.
Yeah, your management style is really going to be important on the type heifer that you purchase. And then, and of course, your financial standing or your need for capital is going to affect how much you can afford to pay also, and the capacity to handle that added debt. Also, current and expected future costs and revenues, because we don't know what the future is going to bring. When we do this program, these are estimates of what other people have said is going to happen in the future. And so part of that is you determining what you think is going to happen when you buy these heifers.
Yeah, all these things go into the cost and specifically, and these are specifically things that go in the model. As Randy was saying, value and cost. In other words, how much you sell your product for, how much you sell the cull cows for, how much you buy them for as heifers or pay to have them raised or raise them yourself or whatever. So your replacement cost is going to be that. So you bought or raised. Your salvage value is, okay, so when you're done with that cow, as far as being an active part of your herd, what's the value? What is their value? And it's important to know that, because the difference between replacement cost and salvage value is how much you're going to have to pay off for that animal. And then you got death rate. Obviously, if they die, they're not terribly productive. You want to talk about cow productivity, Randy?
Yeah, so basically the productivity is just the pounds of calf she produces per year. And that can depend on the cow, right? How well she milks, and what genetics there are for growth in that calf as far as pounds sold. Those kind of things are going to be really important for that cow.
So your longevity is important too. In other words, if I buy an animal and she stays in the herd 1 year, that doesn't give her a long time to pay back all that cost that I have incurred by buying her. So longevity is really an important factor when you're talking about the replacement value of an animal. And then
Right.
the calf value, sorry.
In some cases, buying a cow that gives too much milk and doesn't breed back is a poor longevity thing. So you got to be really careful when you're purchasing cows on even milk production. Can have an effect on longevity.
Right. Milk production, but that also depends on how you're feeding her and what you're doing. So your management style, so you need to be buying animals that are, and that's where we're not going to talk about that today, though, are we, Randy? That's not our deal today.
Nope, we're gonna head on.
So, but then there's the cost, and that's what does it cost? And this is an important, we're going to talk about some different things in there. So why don't we go to the model, Randy, and talk a little bit about that?
Okay, we'll go there next.
Okay, so we call this the cow purchase calculator. And we love that calculator name because it's COWQLATOR rather than calculator like you're supposed to spell it. I don't know if that indicates our education level or what it indicates, but we like that name. It's kind of cool. But we think it is. Maybe we're too sold on it. But what we have here is this is what the model or the mathematical spreadsheet does. We take this information that's on this page and that they're combined together, as you can see the arrows. For example, longevity, how long the cow lasts. Well, that's going to depend on how often you are replacing cows. In other words, if you're going to keep the cow at a cow herd at a certain size and your cows don't last very long, you're going to have a high replacement rate. Well, the other thing, if your cows are lasting a long time and staying in the herd and you're not going through cows, then you're going to have a lot more longevity per animal on average. And that's, so when you buy a cow, how do you determine what that is? And what we use in this model is we use the average expected rate of replacement. And then we also talk about productivity. So in other words, how did we get productivity? We're going to talk about how we got that, but you got to know the productivity of what the cow is going to give you. In other words, if the cow is going to give you one calf and you knew that, are you going to pay the same that you would if she didn't? Well, you don't know that. So you have to go on an average. But you need to know what a productivity is, the size of the calf and your weaning system and all the things you have there. And we have one proposed and we're going to use. And if anybody wants to know what that is, we're glad to share it with you. Then we got the future expected cost, and then you got the purchase value. Obviously, you got to know that. And then the life expectancy of the cow. Then you have also the future value of those calves. This year, we might have a pretty good handle on it, but 10 years from now, who knows what the price is. So we had to use FAPRI. We use somebody that does economic projections, and those are the ones we use. In fact, what you expect to get in the future might affect what you're willing to pay for the cow, as well as the ending value of that cow when you're done with her.
Yeah, just a thought, FAPRI is who Congress uses to do their projections also. So it's used by quite a few people. The other thing I want to say is that the productivity in this model was kind of based off of some GSL or Goodman and Sandhills lab data that we have collected over the years, right, Matt?
Right, it is. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit about those assumptions right now in the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, do you want to start with this or you would like me to do it?
So the forecast assumptions, so this forecast requires several key pieces of information to calculate an average break-even value or cow replacement value. So the coming season's annual cost of production per cow including bull cost. We use the cow cost calculator to estimate the 3 levels of cost. And we also went off of some programs that we've done with producers that gave us their cost. So we tried to use cost that actual producers had given us in this scenario. Go ahead, Matt, I'll let you finish that.
Okay, and you can, anybody's welcome to use the cost calculator. You can download it as long as you have an Excel spreadsheet on your computer. You can use it to calculate what you think your costs are. It's kind of a good way to budget. But we didn't, these costs, the 735.48 and the 990.32 and the 866.30 don't include things like, these are just cost. They're not return. In other words, calving rate's going to determine how many calves you get. The cow replacement cost is a depreciation measure, and that's basically also the, you know, how much it costs to take her to the sale barn and some things like that, as well as depreciation and death loss are not used. The ones we could have used the calculator to do that, the cow cost calculator, but instead we put them in the cow purchase calculator, so they're part of that model that we had before.
And it figures basically cost for that cow year by year, just like a depreciation, only it does it in the calculator. We didn't do it in the cow cost calculator.
Right. So we got it. Let's go to the next slide then. All right. Again, we told you the prices, the cost, I mean, not the prices. We had a low of 735. These are a little different than the ones FAPRI has. And so what we had to do is we had to adjust them in the model by using the difference. In other words, there was a percent increase in cost every year that FAPRI projected. We use those percent increases to adjust these costs as they were individually run through the model. So we used Nebraska cost to talk about Nebraska break-even values based on Nebraska pasture values, which you see down there below. We used all that to put together these cost values.
Right.
Next slide, please. And go ahead, Randy.
So if we look at this,
this?
we just looked at, so pasture cost, this is just percent of all costs. So pasture cost in the high was about 38%, or the low was 38% to a high of 43% of all costs was due to pasture costs. If we look at pasture costs as percent of feed costs, it ran about 65 to 68%. And then feed cost of all costs for the cow in this model ran about 56 to 60%. We know people have higher than that, and we know there may be a few lower than that, but that's what our model has in it.
So what we're saying here, and Randy's done a really good job of this, is that, so if you want to think of it, in other words, of all the costs that I incurred during that year, so if I have the $700 cost, whatever it is, 38% of that to 43% of that were basically the cost for the range of the pasture to feed that cow for that year. And then of the feed cost, total feed cost, 65% of the feed cost was pasture, as Randy said, and so on and so forth. Good job, Randy.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. So you want to talk this one, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. So cow longevity is really important. In other words, if you bought a cow and you were assured that she was going to last guaranteed for 5 seasons, you would be willing to pay more for that. Whereas you got a cow that's not guaranteed and she might die, she's got a 20% chance of dying, you're going to pay a lot less for that. So longevity is really important in trying to determine the value of an animal when you're purchasing her. So you don't know what that is. So we had to find a way to get that at that number. And the way we figure is, well, if you have a 14% rate every year, chances are 14% of those cows are going to have to be replaced every year. Well, then that gives you an idea how long the cow is going to live, because mathematically, if you do that symmetrically, only so many cows in the herd to keep the cows constant, you have to buy so many cows. Same thing with the 20 and 28%. So once we knew those, we could know how many cows replaced on an annual basis and then make some estimates about how they're going to be replaced. But that gives you a number to work with. And if you had a replacement number and you wanted to use the model, you could put your own number in there. Cattle prices, these are, you got to have prices for both cull cows and the calves. But then we also have to have it 10 years in the future. And so we use the FAPRI projections for these prices, but the prices for the cattle for the calves, because we were selling 550, 500, 500 to 600 pound calves, and cattle prices in Fabry are 750 pounds. So we had to adjust them using a price slide. And so we use a historical slide value in a percent term. Sorry.
Matt, we use that weight because most people, if they sell them off the cow, are going to be lighter than what Fabry uses, probably going to be backgrounded for a time. And we know that some people do that, but this is all wean calf sales.
Yeah, we did this to try to simulate what we expected a normal or a representative ranch, if you will, for Nebraska, probably in the Sandhills would probably be the best way to say it. Now, there are differences in ranches all across, and you would have to make adjustments accordingly. Okay, and then productivity is the number of calves that the animal has. It's also productivity is cow size. In other words, how big she is, calving rate, how many calves per cows. In other words, that's really important when I talk about profitability or making money or paying money back for cows. In other words, if half your cows don't have calves, it's kind of hard it's going to be pretty tough to go. So all these things are done, and we use the historical production records of GSL, and we use that in the simulation.
So we use the 3 replacement rates. And so on our graphs, you're going to see low, average, and high. The low is 14%, medium or average of 20%, and high of 28%.
I might say that we took a survey. It's been a while. It's probably been 15 or 20 years. There was a survey given about what replacement rate was. And it turns out that on average, it seemed like it was really close to 20 to 21% would be a normal replacement rate for ranches, according to that survey.
So our next slide, this is the forecasted replacement of heifers break-even values with non-borrowed money. So in other words, this come out of the operation. They didn't have to borrow money for that cow. It would have come out of operating. So what we found is on those low cost, low replacement rate cows, break even was about 2173 versus on a low replacement rate with high cost was 1504, was $1,504. So you can see about $600, $700 difference. So your costs are really important in figuring what you can pay for your replacement. As we go down, as we have a higher replacement rate, of course, our values go down, our break-even values go down because you're replacing them more often. And even at 20%, 28% with the highest cost was our lowest we could pay for those heifers. And that was 1,083, which was about half of that 14% high rate. Matt, do you have anything to add?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Randy, you explained that beautifully. I like what you said, and recognizing. So in other words, what put it another way is that as your replacement rate goes up, your replacement value or break-even value goes down. As your costs go up, the same thing occurs. Your replacement value goes down. And so you look at these 9 scenarios, and you got a high cost, a low cost, and a medium cost. At the high cost with the high replacement rate, which is the worst possible scenario that we put in there. So if you had a replacement rate that was higher than that, you would be even wanting to be paying less than that, given the future forecast that Fabry has indicated and the Nebraska prices.
And if you raise your own heifers and these costs, you can use this for that too, because you still have to pay for those heifers, whether you raise them or you buy them.
It's actually the same thing, isn't it, Randy? Because in other words, you're paying money out or in labor or time or whatever. Maybe if your labor is free, I guess it doesn't matter. But if you really start counting it up, what you pay for that animal, you've got to try to get back out. Otherwise, you're not going to be profitable.
So we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to talk about borrowed money. So what does borrowed money do, Matt?
Okay, so what happens is, in other words, if I go to we did a 50% borrowed level. In other words, if I took, and what we did simply in the model or in the simulation is we took, if you paid, and we assumed you paid about $1,400 for these animals, $37.50, I think is what the actual on the average. If you paid half of that out of your pocket, operating, you know, capital or whatever it is, or if you paid it out of, you had to go down and borrow it, that would change the value of the heifer slightly. And you can see that it's done that, can't you, Randy?
Yeah, it's definitely lower. And you can see that, you know, where that lowest rate was 1,000 something last time, is 928 here. And the top rate was about 2,100 for the non-borrowing. So we reduced that by about $100. So you can see that it decreases it. Matt, do you have anything else to add?
Well, I think on the next slide, we're going to show them the difference between the two, I think.
Okay,
So
there we are.
Yeah, so this tells you then at the high, low, and medium, it's not as graphical, but it's a table, but it tells you the difference between borrowing money and not borrowing money. So in other words, let's just take the worst possible outcome. You got a high cost, you got a low replacement rate, and there's $200 and almost $50 difference between what you could pay if you bought the animal with cash versus if you had to borrow 50% of that money. That's what that says. And so we can go to the best situation, which is not a situation I'd want to be in, but the best situation as far as the difference is concerned is that $89.34, where you have a low cost, but you got a really high replacement rate. There's only an $89 difference. But let's go back up to the slide. I want to show them something, Randy.
Back, okay, we'll go back.
Please. Okay, so but look, at the lower, at the higher call rate, the most you could pay for an animal is $1,300. So even if it's only $89 difference, imagine what that's still, you can only pay $1,200. You know, it's quite a bit lower than the upper case where you have the lower call rate. So call rate really impacts what you can pay for the animal. It's quite a bit different.
Yes. I'm going to go back. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide. I think we've covered that pretty well. Okay. This I think is really important too, because this probability of replacement heifer meeting or exceeding her cost if you pay $1,437.50 for it with non-borrowed money. So you pulled it out of the operation. So you know your success rate is pretty high for that low replacement, low cost. It's almost 70%. So that says 70% of the time you're probably going to break even or make money on that heifer. And tell me if I'm saying that right, Matt.
You are. It is when you pay $1,437.50. That is
right. If you pay $1,437. So, and as you can see, for that high replacement rate and high cost, only 23% or almost 24% of the time you're going to be profitable. That's not very good odds. If I'm a producer, I want the good odds, and that would be the blue ones, or the replacement rate of 14%, depending on cost. They were still better in all cases, even at the higher cost. That 1,400 heifer is more likely to be profitable, even though it gets lower as your costs go up.
Well, and what Randy is saying too is that, okay, so another way to look at it, which I think Randy did a beautiful job there, is you think about this. So at the let's just take the middle one. We haven't talked about the 800. So you have your middle of the road cost. You got $866, let's say, that you is your annual cost for cows, given the assumptions that we're talking about. And so you get a 63.4%. So in other words, if I buy 100 heifers, I would expect on average that 63 of them would end up paying back the $1,437.50. That's what I would expect. Whereas if I had the situation where I had the high call rate, I would only expect a 32 out of the 100 heifers. I'd only expect 32 of them to actually pay for that $1,437. So that's what makes you realize that the break-even cost, and that's where what we're saying is that's why the break-even cost for the 735s and the low call rate is higher than $1,437, and that the call rate for the high cost and the high call rate is lower than the $1,437. But this tells you if you paid $1,437, what your chances are of breaking even on that animal. Can't hear you, Randy.
So, so the next one is borrowed money, and you can see real similar, except on that the really high cost, high replacement rate, you only have 11. So 11 out of 100 is going to be profitable, not at $1,400. So that just says you got to pay way less for them, right? Because it's not very likely they're going to make a profit, or very few of them are.
In fact, we could say at the 11.4%, basically at that gray level, that 900 and some dollars break-even value would be what you would pay for them, and that would be on average when you would break even. But at $1,437.50, you're only gonna have 11%, 11 of those cows out of 100 that are gonna actually pay you back that $1,400 or more.
I'm gonna let you do this one, Matt.
Thank you, Randy. Okay, this is not really complicated, but basically what we did is we said, okay, not everybody has a $735 cost or a $900, but what we can do is we can say at the $735 cost on the top table where no money is borrowed, basically it's going to cost you for every 1% change. So there's a 1% change in increase. So in other words, at $735, maybe I have that $2,173 break even. What happens if I have a 15%? Well, to approximate that, that's going to be about $60.25 less you can pay. So at 17%, it would be $120 less. At 18%, it would be $180 less. So that value is for every 1% change in that box is for every, at that particular price level, or a cost level, sorry, is what it's going to do to your ability to break even. Now, that's different for the different ranges, as you can see that. It's very different. Like if you go over to the 20 to 28%, for every 1% increase, you're only lose $41 from that. But remember, you're starting at a lower level of replacement value to start with, break-even value. So a lower break-even value. So that's how much it's going to change it. And each one of those values is a way that changes that. Now, we have the same thing in the bottom table, only this is for when money is borrowed. And that's the only difference. But basically speaking, we're going to go through an example on how you can use this in a minute. But basically speaking, what we're saying then is for every 1% change at the $735 or the low cost rate, we will lose $58 worth of break-even value. So we can pay $58.39 less for a 1% change. So at 14%, basically it goes to 58. At 15%, it's $58.39. At 16, it's twice that, and so on and so forth. And that's what each one of those values is used for. Randy, let's go to the next slide because it's similar. This one talks about it from a reverse section. Do you want to talk about this one, Randy?
Yeah, I think I can get this one, Matt.
Yeah, you do this one.
So for every value for each dollar increase in cost. So for instance, if we're in the 735 to 866 range, so from low to medium, for every dollar. So if we go to 736.48, that's going to reduce that price by about $2.60. And as you can see, as we go from the 866 or the average to the high cost, for the low replacement rate is 265. We go clear to the high replacement rates, it's only $1.57 per dollar. So it's not as much, but remember those are lower costs already that you can afford to pay for that heifer. So
yeah, your break-even values are going down as well. Absolutely.
Right. And then for borrowed money, you can see it's a little bit more, that it's $3.07. So let's say if we if you had $236.48 in cost, then you would decrease the replacement rate value by $3.07. So that $2,100 heifer, you're going to take off $3.07. And if you go another dollar more, it's going to be the same way till you get to 866. And then once you get over 866, it's $3.10 per dollar. So it's going to drop a little bit faster there. And if you go to the 28% replacement rate, it's a little lower, like it's $1.92 per dollar. But remember, you're already a really low value anyway. So it's going to just make it lower for you.
Right. You get dinged less, but you got less to ding.
Right. You have less to spend. So,
that's right. You to break even.
Right. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's talk about this. This is the table that we made from those particular values. We went through and did all the math for you, put it in a spreadsheet. So now that we can use this spreadsheet. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you an example how to do that. So Randy, go to the next slide for a minute. Okay, suppose that we have the mighty fine ranch. Okay, and I'm sure all of you have a mighty fine ranch. And the figures are that it's $767 a cow. So it's not the right, the price doesn't match the price that we have. We said the cost doesn't match. The cost we said was lower than that. And then we also know where it's at. And then we also know that the replacement rate is 17%, which is in the middle of the replacement rate that we had. So let's go back up to the table for just a second. All right, so we find 17% column. We follow it down till we get a number that's close to the 767. Well, we don't have a 767, we only have a 765. But that says that the break-even value we could pay for a heifer, given that cost, the 765, and the 17% is $1,923. Well, that's, $200 less than, but that's how you'd find that break-even value. So any value we had or we could put in there, we could find the break-even value based on what we know the cost and we know what our replacement rate is. It gives us an idea, ballpark. It's a forecast. It's a ballpark. It's an idea of what that cow might be worth if we're going to pay for it. And so it gives you an idea of that. We could do the same thing with the graph below. We have a table below. Okay, so let's go to the table below. So we got the same 17%. So we have 17% and we have the 765, which is the closest number. And we go over here and it says that our break even is $1,787. Now look, we know our cost is $2 higher. So that's going to be an overestimate probably of what the forecast is. And that's okay. But we got an approximate idea because he's going $10 increments. You find the closest one and you follow it over and you follow the call rate or the replacement rate. So if you were just using this table for fun of it and you say, well, I'm borrowing 50% of the value of the cow and I got about an $815 cost. So there's 815. And I've got, let's say I've got a 23% call rate or expect to return. So I'm going to go 815 all the way over to $1,411. That would be my estimated break-even forecast that I could pay for the animal. So it gives you an idea of what, given different cost structures, different replacement rates. Any comments, Randy?
No, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but it's really helpful. So that way you don't have to have, if your prices don't match ours, you can at least get close and see what your replacement rate is. So it gives you a guideline to follow to say, hey, I can spend around this much depending on what my prices and stuff are, and I should break even, or I'm more likely to break even. And right. So it gives you a guideline when you're buying heifers to give you something to look at and kind of help you with picking out heifers and trying to stay within a price range. And we know that, it's competitive bidding when you go to a barn to buy them, that you may have to pay a little bit more, but at least you have a guideline to look at.
Well, the other thing to remember too is that we've made a lot of, to make this work, to come up with the numbers, we've made not guesses, but we have used a lot of information that's going to forecast the future. Because remember, it's the future value of the animals sold that are going to pay for the current animals. So we're assuming that prices are right. So let's say if you were really optimistic that prices were going to continue to rise for the next 5 or 10 years, and you really believe that, then these values would probably be too low. But if you believed in the FAPRI estimates where they go kind of up and down, then this is probably going to be okay. But if you believe prices are going to go down, then this would be too much. You would be paying too much if you went by these prices. So you're going to have to decide whether you are, well, a FAPRI is good enough for me, or whether you are really optimistic or you're really pessimistic. And that's how you can use it. So we're not trying to tell you that this is the price and the value of that animal, and you 100% guaranteed if you don't pay that much, you're going to make money. What we're saying is, given the information we have today, the markets we know about, and all the information that we have, this is our best forecast of what you can pay for that animal.
It's our best guess.
Well,
with as much information.
Come on, that's not scientific, Randy.
With as much information as we can use in the table. So okay, let's go to our conclusion, Matt.
Okay. You want to start us, or?
Yeah, so if we look at increased productivity without changing costs, resulted in greater revenue at higher break-even values for replacement cows. So you can afford to pay more if you have lower costs. And the other thing is, if the prices are better, it's going to make you have a higher cost too. So productivity changes could include, so you could be better than this depending on your calving rate, or you could be worse than this depending on your pregnancy rate and your calf growth rates, how much they weigh at the sell barn, how much people like them when they buy them, if they want to pay more for them. All those things can affect that that price.
Right. So in other words, we only use a range of 14 to 28% call rate. What if you got a call rate of 30? Well, then you're going to say, well, and I'm not saying anybody has that, but if you did, you would be going, okay, then I can't afford to pay as much as these forecasts are saying if I believe the rest of it. The other thing is, if you got a higher calving rate than we assume, that means you're going to have more calves to sell and more productivity. And so you can afford to pay more. Now, we're not going to say how much more, but that we know you could pay more. And it's the same thing with all those. In other words, if you have a more productive cow herd, or your costs are less than what we say, that is in the range that we say, then that's going to change what you can afford to pay.
Also, cow call cow prices is going to affect how much, because when prices are higher, you get more for that cow. It's gonna pay you back better. So all those factors are effective as well as prices.
The other thing is, you may find that you want to pay more for a cow than what these things say. And that's fine, as long as you recognize that you're buying that cow for some purpose. In other words, you really got to have those genetics, and you're willing to pay for one or two cows, you're willing to buy them at a higher price. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that you might not use these values, but the most important thing is that you recognize they're a guide, they're a help, and you got to have, what's the cow going to be paying you back on? And that's over the long term as well as the short term. And we didn't calculate the genetic contribution to the herd or anything like that. So those are the things that you might want to consider. We're not telling you to go out and spend more money, but we're saying that's what you need to consider, and that's the decisions you need to make as a cow calf producer.
And like we said in the bottom, some of the things that can affect prices are demand shifts in the cattle market, increased exports, wars could decrease the price if we go into a war. All those things can affect things fast, and we don't know if those are going to happen. Also, supply shifts due to drought, the cattle cycle, those can increase prices long term, but short term may lower prices. And then, of course, cow disease outbreaks. What if we have another bad cow disease? All those can affect how much you're going to get for those calves in the revenues, or the cows in the revenue side.
Okay. Now, last thing is, you remember that we're providing these forecasts because we're trying to give people an idea of what might exist and to think about. And, if anybody is really interested in doing their own forecast, they're welcome to contact Randy or myself, and we can work them through the process with the electronic spreadsheet. But I will tell you right now, you're going to have some information about what you think the next 10 years prices are, information about what your costs are and what your productivity is, and what your cull rate, or how many cows you're replacing every year, in order to do that. If you don't have that information, you can probably figure it out with stuff that you have on hand. But you're welcome to call us and talk to us, and we'd be glad to help you out if we can. All right. So another thing too is that, you know, when you purchase animals, it's important that on average that the animals are paid for. In other words, you can buy a few expensive cows, but they don't pay for themselves, and not every cow is ever going to pay for herself. But the important thing is that you have enough cows that you bought or replaced that do pay for the ones that you didn't get paid for. And that's the whole point. And that's what the break-even value represents, because basically it's an average, on average, if all things, death rates and calving rates and all the things that are going back and forth and moving around and all this stuff, on average, this cow with that replacement rate year after year after year, with those prices that were projected, that's the value you can pay on average given your operations cost. And that's what basically it does.
I think the key thing at the very end is, you know, selecting the right heifer when you're purchasing heifer that fits your operation is important to making your profit regards of whether buying or raising that animal. So saving that heifer that's going to be long-term, that's going to do you good, is really important. So that selection process is going to be important, and making sure that you get the right heifer is going to be better for your profitability in the long run. Whether you're buying it or raising it, as long as you can find one that's got good longevity, that's going to last for you, even though we don't know it, but if we find some that work, we might want to stick with them, because in the long run, longevity is going to be really important to that profitability of that heifer, along with everything else.
Absolutely. Well, there was a question and it said, did you figure depreciation? And, you know, cow depreciation is an interesting concept because depreciation depends on the life of the cow. Yes, the short answer to that is we have depreciation accounted for. But the thing that's interesting is you depreciate a 10-year-old cow differently than one that lasts 10 years, different than you depreciate a cow that lasts only a year or two. You know, there's a big difference in, because one has 10 years to pay back all that loss of value and eventually get replaced. Another one, 1 year and you got to replace her. I mean, there's a big difference in the depreciation rate of those two animals. So each animal has a different depreciation rate, if you want to call it that. What I call it is a cow replacement cost, if you really want to think about it that way. Basically, however long that cow lives, you got a replacement cost. And on average, you have a replacement cost. And each one of the cows that we simulated and did, and the whole process, because we did it's a long simulation process, and I don't really want to get too much into the mathematics and stuff, but basically speaking, they were randomly drawn, they were drawn from the herd based on size, and they basically got, each animal was accounted for and lived a certain length of time, produced a certain size of calf based on her body weight and her ability to produce, which was all biological data that came from Gudmundson's. So yes, all that is accounted for in the model. It's I think a pretty good example of what we did the best we could given a representative ranch.
So I have a question. When they calve in the calving season factor in? And that is not in the model, right, Matt?
Okay, so the question again, Randy, is?
Did when they calve in the calving season factor in?
Okay, yes.
Because of the random?
Because it's random. In other words, these were calves that were actually born to cows. We did not worry about, and some of them were born early in the calving season and some were late, but obviously this was GSL Ranch, and I think they have a 60-day bull season. So the calving season is somewhat similar to that. But so there are some born later and some earlier, and some of that goes on. And we also know that as cows age, especially at our GSL ranch, that I've noticed that statistically speaking, as cows age, their calves usually move closer and closer to the end of the calving period. In other words, they breed later, they breed up later. There's some of that goes on over time. On average, older cows breed later than younger cows. And that has a lot to do with too. Heifers are bred like sometimes a month earlier and a bunch of other things. But the point is, yes, that's part of the model. So the age and size of the cow contributes to the productivity of that animal and how big a calf that she's going to have. And that's all factored into the model. So her productivity then is important.
Okay.
Do we have another question?
I just see, I don't see any yet. Is there any more people that that have questions. I don't see any more in the chat box.
Okay, so there was one that Heifer, let me read it.
Here we go.
Uh, Heifer time of breeding effects on longevity and replacement costs. Okay, that was not specifically changed or altered, so I don't know if you can answer the question how it changes. But what we did is we assumed that the heifer was going to calve at the beginning of the calving season as a replacement. So in other words, that you bought a heifer or you bought your heifer that you bought was going to calve when you wanted her to calve. So I don't know when she was bred, but I do know when she calved. So I'm assuming that that was what we did. Now that doesn't change it. So I guess, you know, if we had some experiments when we could biologically do this, where somebody bred heifers earlier and they calved a month earlier, we bought them in a month earlier, that would probably change some. And I imagine that it might mean you could probably pay a little bit more if indeed it extended her longevity in the herd. But then of course you've got nutritional issues with the calf as a 2-year-old to 3-year-old, and supplement feeding to keep her so that she stays in the herd and doesn't wash out as well. So all those things probably have a factor on it. So that's what affects your replacement rate. So in other words, your replacement rate kind of captures that. If you got a high replacement rate, let's say at 28%, that means you're getting rid of a lot of 2-year-old cows. That means that they either got bred late or whatever going on, they're just not sticking around. But if you got like a 14% or maybe whatever percent that's low, that means those heifers have got to be sticking around. Okay, because it's at that level, the 2-year-olds, more of those are called than the other level. 3-year-olds increases as you go through the age of the cows until, I mean, not percentage wise, but it doesn't, the number of cows, because the number of 2-year-olds in the herd are going to be more than, in this assumption of the model we use, the 2-year-olds were the greatest number of cows in the herd. I hope that answers the question.
I don't see any more questions right now. I think we've answered them all.
Okay. Well, Randy, I really appreciate you working on this. It's something that you've made sure has gotten done every year, and some of the things you've done are appreciated. Randy is our educator. He's the one that goes around talking about this kind of stuff. I, as an econ specialist, I work on the parts of putting together the modeling issues and that sort of thing. It's kind of an interesting thing. I don't know of anywhere else you're going to find forecasts for this that I know of. If there is, let us know. We can maybe compare them and see how well we do. But we appreciate you being here. We hope that it's something that it is helpful in your operation and helping you to continue to be profitable.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. A recording of the webinar will be posted at cap.unl.edu, where you can also register for other upcoming webinars. Join us next Thursday for tips on getting started on a farm or ranch with help from USDA's Farm Service Agency. Please click the link in the chat box here to take a brief survey, provide feedback on this webinar, and inform our upcoming sessions. Thanks again for joining us. And if you have questions, feel free to email either one of us, and we'll be glad to work with you.
Thank you very much. Randy, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ryan. And we will see everyone in another webinar.